Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Oh, how's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. As always, I am your host, Scot McKay, at Scot McKay on just about every major platform, including YouTube, where I hope you'll check out our 2-minute videos that detail new and original answers to some of the most common questions men ask about dating and relationships. Today, I have a returning guest. His name is Michael McPherson. He happens to live in one of the most beautiful parts of the United States, at Sedona, Arizona. And he is the author of Everything You Never Learned About Sex, Take Back Your Masculine Power and Use Your Sex Energy for Good. And he is a mentor, teacher, and educator on the topic of sexuality and sex energy. Michael, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm grateful to have you here. Gratitude is a good thing, isn't it?
It definitely is.
Yeah, I think gratitude pretty much changed my life, and it could change a lot of other people's lives too, but that's just my biased opinion. Anyway, enough about me. You're in Sedona, Arizona, which, of course, everybody knows is the land of the beautiful red rocks and lots of new agey stuff going on there. But I'll tell you why Sedona is close to my heart, Michael. It's got one of the most wonderful, entertaining, fantastic motorcycle roads in the entire United States passing through it, which is 89A in Arizona. You live in a wonderful place, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for validating that for me. I absolutely love it here, and every day I honestly feel so blessed to just be in such a beautiful place.
Blessed is another great word. Grateful and blessed are two things to definitely add to your, your mental state for a much happier life. So, man, you're batting 1,000 so far.
So far, so good.
Perhaps the great trifecta would be sexual maturity. That would be another thing that most men would do well to add to their repertoire of life skills. But a lot of times when it comes to sexual maturity, a lot of times guys are growing older, but they don't grow up. Do they, Michael McPherson?
Well, that hasn't been my experience, and that certainly hasn't been the experience of many women I've worked with as well.
That they don't?
That they don't, right.
Okay. Now, you're saying that you're raising your own hand here.
Yes, I'm definitely involved in that, and it's a continuing education. You know, sexuality and certainly intimacy in a sexual setting isn't something that's ever comfortable. It's not something we've ever settled. It's ongoing. It's always evolving. So I think it's important for all of us to stay in the game and be humble students.
You know, just to kind of kick off this conversation at the objective level, I have to tell you, I talk to a lot of my peers in the dating and relationship advice world, and a lot of so-called experts I don't think are even really as evolved as I'm sure they could benefit from being in this particular area. And I don't want to sound like I'm judging. I mean, obviously, I've been a young man and I've been under-evolved in this area myself, but it just seems like a lot of guys, even experts, when you start talking about the value of women and the deeper meaning of sexuality and intimacy and anything surrounding that subject, they really just say, yeah, well, I really just want some pussy. You know where I can get some? And they kind of leave it at that. Even to the point where a conversation can turn towards, say, avoiding crazy women and avoiding women who will ruin your life with psychoses and addictions and not being a very nice person in general. I got a response from a fellow expert to the effect of, yeah, well, crazy pussy's the best pussy, so I don't know if most guys are going to listen to you, man. It's just insane.
Yeah.
I mean, at this very baseline level, it just seems like we let the small head think for the big head, even after we should have learned the lesson a few times after a couple rough laps around the block. You know what I mean, Michael?
I do. I think there's a lot here to uncover. And for people that have that perspective that it's just about pussy, getting your dick wet, however they would phrase it, it's really an unfortunate, superficial look at something that holds the potential for so much more. That's my perspective, at least.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit more about your perspective. I want you to kind of take the floor. Tell me about everything I've never learned about sex that would help me evolve to a higher level as a man in terms of understanding sexuality and sex energy and, well, getting a little bit more evolved, if you will, at the psycho-emotional level? Go ahead, man, riff away.
To start, I think most people have sexuality and sex energy collapsed. They think they're the same thing. So anytime a guy feels stimulated, excited, feels his mojo flowing, feels his sex energy circulating, he really only thinks there's one outlet for it, which is sexuality or sexual expression. And in my opinion, there's many outlets for our sex energy, what I call our creative life force energy, what I call our prana, kundalini, whatever name you want to use for it. It's all the same stuff. You can use it for creativity. You can use it in your other relationship. You can use it in your business life and building your business. You can channel it towards God. And ultimately, that is the biggest piece that I feel is missing for men, is not understanding that our sexuality and the implication or implementation of it is actually a way to connect with our creator. Many people have many different names for that, but it's a way to access our divinity, not in an outside sense, like looking up at the sky or the night stars, but in an inside sense, the love of God that lives within us. And if men knew that that was a potential, or if that was a possibility, or maybe even an inevitability, I think they would approach sex and sexual intimacy so much different and with such a higher level of reverence and respect than they do now.
We're talking about evolution here, and the first thing that comes to mind is how so many people, when they think about this combination of sexuality and God, as you were bold enough to make the juxtaposition thereof, shame is what comes to mind. God is like this big brother in the sky who is watching you and making sure you don't do anything naughty, and if you do, you're going to get slapped and punished for it. Lots of world religions influence the people who follow them to feel a lot of guilt, a lot of shame over even being sexual beings. And coming from a Judeo-Christian place myself, Michael, I've always been very confused by that. And that's something that I've always found incredibly, unfortunate, because our sexuality has to have been created by God himself. Because here we are, and we're sexual. God created them male and female, as so says the Bible itself, and yet here we are thinking it's somehow bad to be sexual. I would like for you to give us your impression of how sexuality pervades our entire being in this higher, more evolved place that you speak of. I'd love to hear your take on that. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, what I'll start with is you touched on a topic that was going to be my first topic for what keeps men from maturing sexually. So I'd just love to expand on that even more, because you said it so eloquently. But I think first and foremost, there has to be an acceptance and an understanding that sexuality is a fundamental part of the human experience. Period. End of story. If you're a human being, then you are going to embrace and touch upon this topic, and it's going to be a part of your life. And because it's so intimate to who we are, it's so close to home, we often have difficulty navigating and being at peace with our own sexuality. We have difficulty accepting, just as you said, this part of us that is sexual, because we have a cultural interpretation of sexuality and sexual desire as something that interferes with our goodness, that interferes with our relationship to God, as opposed to being something that was instilled in us by our Creator. So most men actually believe that sex and sexual desire are a threat to their quote-unquote goodness. And male sexuality can be and is often characterized as doing harm. That's a common theme that's now in our world. We've heard about toxic masculinity, and certainly it can be harmful. There are things like that out there. But from very early on, whether it's from our familial dynamics, whether it's from religious contexts, or just the culture we grow up inside of, we receive the message that sex is shameful, or that our sexuality is something that distances us from God. And in that, there's implicit shame. So if you can imagine, and you don't have to imagine because it was both of our experience, I'm sure, growing up having an inherent part of us that then is externally shamed, which then we internalize, we're immediately, typically by the time a man comes to sexual maturity, biological sexual maturity, which is around puberty or at puberty, we're already at this war within ourselves, this good and evil battle within us that is not inherent. It wasn't ours to begin with. We weren't, quote unquote, born with it in that way. So men typically fall into one of two categories at that point, at the point of biological maturity and puberty, which is those that choose to repress their sexuality based on what was given to them or instilled in them or taught to them, and those that rebel against what was given to them, taught to them, and indulge or even overindulge in their sexuality. And both are a result of shame. It doesn't matter which way you spin it, whether you're in the realm of repression or whether you're in the realm of indulgence. It's all shame that's driving the behavior. So it's important for us to recognize that and slow down enough to investigate our internal landscapes to look at, what is our come from as it relates to our sexual behavior and our sexual expression.
Michael, as you're talking, I'm reminded of a long-running conversation here at X and Y Communications, especially between my wife and I when we do podcasts together, where we wonder aloud how there can possibly be 8 billion people in this world when it's so hard to have sex. I mean, can you imagine if this were easy? We'd be overrun, right? And that reminds me that there really is pressure on the birth rate in so many different ways. And it occurs to me as you're talking that I can throw another pebble on that pile that's making this mountain of reasons why there's pressure on the birth rate. And it's that men are just under-evolved sexually. I think we've always had kind of a little bit of a caveman mentality there. I'm selling it short, of course. A lot of guys definitely have had a caveman mentality towards sexuality for millennia now. But I think nowadays being labeled toxic and anytime we show any interest in a woman, it's rape. I mean, they've kind of calmed down from so glibly using the R word nowadays. I'm glad they've done that. But still, I mean, there's this weird admonishment to men to stop being sexual at all because it's an affront to all women when you are. Notwithstanding all the heterosexual women out there who are just as horny as we are, right? I mean, what's a heterosexual woman to do if all the men are under-evolved sexually? But it just doesn't make any sense because, you tell men not to be sexual anymore and you expect more evolved sexuality after you've told men just to stop it. I mean, what do they all say? Do better. Do better is the international virtue signal for, I just want you to go away. I don't want you to get better. I just want you to stay out of the conversation. Sit down, shut up, stay in your lane, do better. We're never told how to do better. We're just told to stop it. You know what I mean? That just makes men even more sexually frustrated, as a general population, and leaves us more confused about where to go from here, right?
Look, I think there is a whole world of women out there that are feeling underfucked by men, period, or their man. But it brings me to the other side of our conversation. So we touched on the cultural interpretation and the shame that's in the air. But even if we were to take women out of the picture, right, and our impact and our effect on them, and just looked at ourselves and our own sexuality, there is an inherent fear in men, and this is me saying this is my perspective, there is an inherent fear of men actually embracing and facing off with their carnal nature. Our sexuality is at the primal core of who we are as men. And if we're going to go into it, then we're going to have to take responsibility for the power that's there. And I don't think that most men are willing to, and I think that many men are afraid to. And all the work that I've done around my sexuality, anytime I stimulate what I would call my root chakra or the base chakra or this part of me around my genitals that hosts my life force energy, what's always there is the sensation of incredible power, equally matched by complete and utter terror. So there is a part of us that is capable of carnage and destruction and rape and taking what we want and killing and all these things that we've seen throughout the course of history that we label as horrible, terrible, bad, should have never happened, which maybe that's true. And there's a part of that that lives within us. Ironically, it's actually the source of our power as men, and how we not only interact in our sexual relationships and fuck our women, for lack of a better expression, but how we interact with the world and how we fuck the world. It's one and the same. If we're powerful in life, we have the ability to be powerful in our sexual intimacy and our sexual relationships. So I think there's that fear, that underlying fear that men are afraid to. And of course, I'm saying men, it's not all men, but the large majority are afraid to claim, to face off with, to be responsible for. And that gets mirrored to us in these movements like, let's say, the Me Too movement. And there's a huge difference, I believe, between what you and I are talking about and between that movement. That movement really is about coercion, right? It's about men leveraging their positions, let's say in business, to get something or coerce somebody else into an activity that they don't actually wish to consent to. So if you're a boss and you have a secretary and you want the secretary to advance in her career, she's got to do sexual favors for you. That's what that's about. And I agree that should not be present in our modern day world. That's something we need to be responsible for and eradicate outright. There needs to be equality and equal consent in that regard. But there's something else that's underneath that, which it points to a power that we have that I would say on a collective scale we are not accessing. And certainly you can see that first and primarily in relationships, intimate relationships, and how over time we lose our polarity, we stop desiring to have sex with each other, and next thing you know, we're in a quote-unquote sexless marriage or something like that.
Yeah, so there are two overarching themes that you're alluding to over and over again here, Michael. So let's land the plane a little bit for these guys. You talk in some pretty lofty terms, which are wonderful to hear, and certainly you're bringing a lot of thought that has never been heard before ever on this show, and I always appreciate that. You're very smart. You know what you're doing. So the first thing you're talking a whole lot about is this idea that we are integrally tied to our sexuality. I've heard others say very simplistically, we are sex. Whether we like it or not, we're conceived by sex. A sperm and an egg came together. There was a pregnancy that happened because of sex. Sex caused our birth to happen. We are made of sex. We are made for sex. We are designed to have sex physically, and I would also argue psychologically, mentally, and spiritually, and I don't think you would disagree with that. And our entire lives are about sex and procreating, and if you want to be really cynical, our entire purpose as humans is to procreate and make more humans by having sex to make those humans happen. So if we deny our sexuality, I would agree with you, if I'm hearing you correctly, and you're welcome to set me straight if I'm not, is that, if we deny our sex, we're really denying a huge part of our very identity. So you're talking about that, and you're juxtaposing such a radical thought, right? Seems very simple to me and basic, but to many it's radical, with the notion that as men, our sexuality drives our purpose. It drives our energy. It drives what we're meant to do. So if our testosterone, if you will, that is our sex hormone, right, is also driving us to be violent at times, to take charge, to take ownership of things, to lead, to provide, to protect, that can get ugly, that can get dark, that can get dangerous. But I'll tell you what I know. Michael, we live in a very different world nowadays, say for the past 75 to 100 years, than every other human being before us has ever lived. A lot of people nowadays want to purport that we live in the worst time ever to be alive. Yeah, well, here's a memo to all those people. Let me drop you about 200 years ago, and you'll come running back to 2023 the first time you need ibuprofen. Trust me, okay? We live in a very comfortable world nowadays. We don't live in a world where we have to physically protect or even really physically provide. We don't have to go out, hunt and kill. We don't have to war against a neighboring tribe. This is a shop-worn topic on this show. We know it, right, from a book smart level, but I don't think we feel it at the primal level. We as men don't understand anymore our purpose of providing, protecting, going to war, having to do violent, ugly, dangerous things just to protect those who we love. So the design of our masculine sexual energy was meant to provide, protect, do good things for those who are in our tribe, those people we love, even for our own self-preservation. But nowadays, with the mollycoddled life that we live, it's just become such a perverted notion that I guess people who have never really used their passport, seen how people in developing countries still live, or really, frankly, have never had any real hardship of their own to figure out in life, just want to blame men for a whole lot of stuff. And that's what happens when you get spoiled. You start blaming everybody for all of these pseudo problems we have to invent in our heads. All of the above is anti-masculine. Falling for the complainers and trying to appease the people who are rooting against us is all anti-masculine. That means the men going their own way, the whole embracing of toxic masculinity like you see a whole lot of out there. It is just, well, let me just put it extremely simply. It's specific to our culture and our milieu and our era. This is all new thinking. This is all a perversion of what literally every other man has instinctively understood for millennia, because his life made it obvious to him what his masculinity was for. Nowadays, the lines have all been blurred. You know what I mean?
I do. And I think it's important to emphasize that we're not trying, as you and I talk about this, we're not advocating going back in time to a time where we warred or where we're hunting and gathering, or creating shelters outside in environments that were harsh to us. We are evolving as a species. We are going forward, but it's important to make sure that these parts of us are progressing and moving forward with us, that our primal masculinity is going with us and not something that's staying in the past. And how I feel like we can do that now is by coming together through ritual and through collaboration to create experiences as men that invoke that essence, that primal essence in us, because it's going to apply to this life experience. Even though, we got it easy now, something could easily change. If somebody comes in and tries to put something in your body or take your children away from your home, if you're a docile man, if you're a beta male, you're going to bow to authority and you're going to say, okay, I'm sorry, what did we do? Or the other side of that, if you're in contact with this primal part of you, you're going to rise up and protect your family. You're going to rise up and do what you have to ensure that your community is safe and taken care of. And that's what I feel like is missing in our current context. And I feel like that has to come through a revival of really rites of passage and initiation and coming of age ceremonies for men to get right to the heart of it as men are going through this transition from boy to man, that it's facilitated by elders, it's acknowledged by the community, and therefore it's witnessed so that the participant, the man participating, can see it within himself. It's alive within himself. And the fact that that's not prevalent in our culture whatsoever, I think is doing a great disservice, not only to men, but to everyone, to our entire communities.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that the caveman days are over. That ship has sailed long ago. Yet, I sort of bristle, Michael, when I see guys trying to sort of recreate this primal element. Like, we're all going to howl at the moon and get around a campfire and burp and fart and shoot guns and call ourselves men because we got to get back in touch with this primal part of ourselves. That seems kind of like kayfabe to me. It seems like we're just kind of acting it out, trying to pretend we're taking it seriously. How would you recommend that men actually, really, genuinely, authentically get back in touch with this part of themselves so that, well, presumably, they can genuinely, really, authentically get back in touch with loving our women and sexually satisfying the women in our lives the way we were born to do?
It's a great question, and I have similar perspectives to yours as what's happening out there, because I feel like it is in some ways the blind leading the blind. I'm a 34-year-old male, and in some of the groups that I've been a part of, it's men that are younger than me trying to, quote unquote, initiate me. And I just don't think that works. I think that's where you get, what you described, the guns, the campfires, the trash talk, the whatever. And I'm not interested in that whatsoever. I feel like we have to bring back real wisdom, which is in the elders, truthfully. And I've had a number of conversations with older men now in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, who actually have real wisdom around what it means to be a man and these rites of passage, coming of age, initiation ceremonies that I'm talking about. A lot of them come from indigenous communities, so the cultural context doesn't always translate. But many of the men I have talked to are not from an indigenous culture or a context. And I think that has to be at the forefront, where it's not, I'm trying to make a name for myself, so I'm going to go out there and lead these ceremonies, invite other men in, and then I'm going to be this influencer online, and I'm going to fund my business for that reason. That's not the real thing. I'm not saying it's bad. It creates brotherhood, which I think is very important, but there's a step beyond that, which is actual initiation by an elder. And in indigenous communities, you don't have a teenager. That doesn't exist. That was a name that we created in our Western culture. In indigenous cultures, you are either a boy or a man, and you know which one you are. There's a clear delineation. In our modern world, we have boy, and then we call them teenagers, and then men at 18 when, the law says that we are officially adults. But really, that teenager space, what I've seen, persists well into adulthood, because there was never that clear delineation that was made that, okay, you're a man now, and here are your roles and responsibility in your relationship in the community with women as it pertains to your purpose, and especially as it pertains to your relationship with God, source, creator, whatever you want to call it.
That boyhood persists because it's allowed to.
Yes.
What you're talking about in terms of adolescence being a social construct is not a matter of opinion. It's a fact. Adolescence is absolutely positively a 20th century construct to keep people out of the workforce. The advent of higher education, more education in general, made adolescence necessary. It's really a fascinating study to look at the history of adolescence and how that came about. And there are books written about it, even to the point where by the 80s, education authors such as David Elkind and others were lamenting the fact that, oh my goodness, we're causing our children to grow up too fast. My goodness, they're 12 years old and they've got hair on their balls and we're expecting them to act more like adults now. It's just amazing how much that tide turned to kind of prolonging childhood to almost play keep away from maturing as adults. And listen, I totally get the socioeconomic reasons for that, especially as our world is now, the way things are. I totally get it. But I also completely understand the following. The biggest rite of passage for any male human being in particular is to move out of their parents' house. I mean, I am convinced of it. There's no changing my mind. If anybody out there wants to sign up to get on this show and debate me on it, go for it. Because I have a litany of guys who call me who are still terrified of women, still basically afraid at their core that every girl they meet is going to spank them like their mommy if they do wrong or if they misbehave. Yet, when those same guys wash the Cheeto dust off their fingers, get out from their parents' basement, stop playing video games and go out and live in a real world with a real rent, God forbid, real roommates, and start adulting, they come to me and whisper in hushed tones about how their fortunes with women have magically changed. Oh my God, all of a sudden women are treating me like I'm an attractive man. That's because there's been a rite of passage. There's been a transformation. All of a sudden, these 30-year-old little boys view women differently because they've left the nest and they don't see women as their mommy anymore. They see women as potential lovers. They are now better suited to be man of the house, which means they are more in touch with an adult version of their sexuality at its very core. So, man, I am completely on board with you on all of the above, including the rites of passage. We think we're so civilized here in the Western world, don't we? And we look at some of those other cultures who have a firm grasp of everything we've been talking about here and think of them as kind of primitive or whatever. Oh, hell no. We need rites of passage in this society. And until we figure that out collectively, we're going to keep on scratching our heads over what the meaning of masculinity is and whether or not it, God forbid, has any purpose here in the 21st century. You know what I mean?
Well, I think you pointed to something really important that I just want to emphasize here, which is that life is the ultimate initiator, right? We have the opportunity to
Did I say that?
You did in your own way.
Well, it seems a lot more eloquently stated the way you did in so many fewer words, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to emphasize because even in these ceremonies, we're recreating something, right? We're creating a ritual or a ceremony around life and how life actually is. And if we're really at the heart of our masculine energy and we're out to penetrate life and penetrate our lovers, then we will take the opportunities, like you mentioned, one of them being moving out of the home. We will take those opportunities to be initiated by life.
Penetration. There's a word that should have come up earlier in this conversation. We are physically designed to penetrate women. So our sexuality involves penetration. Again, whether we like it or not. If a guy comes and tries to talk to you in a penetrative way, you'll probably punch him in his face. Whereas if we talk to women in a penetrative way, they'll get turned on. They'll get horny. This is looking into a woman's eyes, stating truth, stating your desires, stating what you want, not in an oppressive, angry, rapey way. See, a lot of guys are probably already cringing at this, but we're not women. You see. And this idea of penetrating life, going out and conquering, going out and winning, going out and defending, providing, protecting. All those are dirty words to men nowadays, but they're at our core as the chief penetrators of our life. Just
because I don't think it's actually clear for men. You know, the word penetration is such a powerful word, it like strikes fear in men. And that's what I was talking about before, that there's an underlying fear of our own primal power because we feel like it's not desired. And of course, we're just afraid of it because we haven't embraced it within ourselves.
And we're not women.
Exactly.
Our sexual energy is different than women's.
Exactly. But a woman embodied in her feminine essence quite literally wants to be fucked out of her mind. And
penetrated.
And I know that's graphic and maybe even a vulgar way of saying that, but she yearns to be penetrated to the degree that her brain shuts off and her mind stops working, whether she's willing to admit it or not. And again, that doesn't mean all forms of sex have to be aggressive. There are ways to build to these experiences. Sensuality is such a beautiful part of femininity. You can ignite orgasm without ever penetrating a woman. And like you said, we are designed inherently for penetration. But it's in her essence, in all her glory, her capacity to surrender so deeply that she allows life to flood through her. This is when she like really lets go. Even when you're inside of her and you feel her vagina elongate, you feel her cervix ascend, making room for you to enter. That's how you know that she truly trusts your masculinity. And as men, this is not something we quote unquote do to women, despite what porn often shows us, that we're just pounding away and then they're having this super erotic, wild, godly experience.
Not that there's not a place for that.
No, there absolutely is a place for that. Absolutely. And that does happen. But again, it's the male ego that thinks, oh, I'm the one who's doing this. It's her body. Her body is creating the magic of that experience, just like our body is creating the magic of our own, right? She's capable of it. And so while we can encourage it, provoke it, and inspire it through our being, our actions, and our primal masculine energy, it's her body that transports her to those places, right? Those places of boundless creativity, healing, and pleasure. And if we really knew our power, we'd understand that our masculinity is not only desired by her, but an invitation into something, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, this episode, so much greater than sex. Even if it's the toe curling, steamy, sexy sex, like oh my God, my whole world is different now. It's that portal that gets opened between the two of us where we both get to meet our divinity and mutually worship at the heavenly gates of divine love. And I know that's poetic, but that's my approach to it.
Sounds like a mic drop to me. You just brought it full circle, my friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, for all you follow the science proponents out there, men penetrate sexually and women get penetrated sexually. And unless you're shallow enough, that's a great word to juxtapose with penetration, right? Yeah. Unless you're shallow enough to believe that sex is purely physical, which I hope you're now more evolved enough to believe otherwise after this podcast, hey, sex is physical, psychological, spiritual, emotional, and that means that penetrative element of it is a part of the big picture. Again, whether we like it or not. This has been a great conversation. I've loved every bit of this. His name is Michael McPherson. He is the author of Everything You've Never Learned About Sex. Take back your masculine power and use your sex energy for good. And man, I think we basically drilled down on his core topic where he is most competent today, for sure. He's out of Sedona, Arizona. He's a mentor, teacher, and educator on the topic of sexuality and sex energy. And when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/sex energy, let's do that. One word, SEXENERGY, you're going to be taken to an unexpected place. Now, I have Michael's book at the top of my Amazon influencer queue, which is mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon, as you expect I would. But when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/sex energy, you're going to find sex energy in the form of drinking chocolate because Michael McPherson runs flycacao.com, and I want you to learn all about that and get you some when you visit his website. And, man, what a great conversation. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and I can't wait to do this again with you.
Yeah, man. And guys, go ahead and visit mountaintoppodcast.com where you'll find our sponsors, Origin in Maine, that's Jocko Willink's company, Hero Soap Company, and The Keyport. When you get anything from any of our sponsors, please remember to use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 for an additional 10% off. Also, listen, guys, I want to talk to you. Get on the phone with me for 25 minutes. Let's talk about your situation with women right now and how to finally get the right woman in your life. When you go to mountaintoppodcast.com, you can sign up to get on my schedule. It won't cost you a dime, and I'll be exactly who you expect me to be. I'm the same down-to-earth guy you have always come to expect on this particular podcast, and that's no different when we're on the phone or Zoom together. All that and more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.